Hello, Tracie Daly here. I want to give another shout out to one of the politest and most pleasant internet people I think I've ever spoke to. Again, it's SIRINE_music on Instagram. Serene from Britain's Got Talent. She was absolutely amazing. And I messaged her to say thanks, really, for inspiring me to get this on an Audible rather than just my book in text format. And she replied, and she said basically, well done and welcome. And she explained a little bit about herself, a little bit about her life, and it was really sweet, it was really pleasant. I am hopeful that she might cover one of the songs that I've spoken to her about as well. If she does, it will be a surprise in part, but it will also be absolutely amazing to hear somebody do a song that my mother absolutely loved. So it'd be cool to hear that. I went over the last chapters that I did, and I felt I sounded really robotic, really serious. And the material is graphic. Rereading it sometimes can be quite hard, and I think I found in parts that I distanced myself from it, and that's not what this is about. It's about telling the story exactly as it was. So my apologies there, and I'll try and be a bit more in-depth and a bit more accurate with my telling here. Although I know from the vast amounts of feedback I've had that people understand that sometimes going over something when you've had a traumatic experience is not the easiest to do. One more shout out, Evil Pudding podcast. Pat and Courtney, I've been back and forward with several times. They're going to be covering Tracie's story. I am so psyched to find out what they come up with. Their humour is contagious and they're absolutely brilliant. I hope they have a no holds barred approach, because as you'll find out later in Tracie's story, my humour, my dark personality is at least in part what got me through, and that's all thanks to a brilliant therapist called Nigel. God knows what I would have done without him. He's still around, funnily enough, but only just. He's now 78. But I'll let Tracie's story fill you in on the rest. So here we are. Let's get into it. Chapter 14. We'd pulled into Uncle Carl's house back in Macclesfield. Suddenly everything was normal again. Carl's mum lived with him. She was Austrian. We could barely understand a word she said, but she was a good woman and loved the kids. She made us bacon sandwiches each morning, and she gave us coins each. She either refused or didn't know their real names, so she called them coins. Usually, me and my sister would get odd amounts. She'd end up giving us extra to make up the difference when we explained to her the amounts weren't the same. They had a huge garden. It went all around the home. It was beautiful. There was large rock salts dotted around the front garden. It snaked around the back, giving the illusion of a starlit sky in daytime. Alan and Pat used to camp with me in their back garden, and we'd watch for shooting stars. I remember visiting Carl and Joanne's house one time when she'd said, "I'm throwing these away. You can have one each." Uncle Carl had to translate for her, but we got the gist. She was referring to several brass items on the table. "Can I have something else?" I'd asked. "Like what?" she said, looking back and forwards to Caroline and Carl. "I want a garden star," I asked her. "He means a rock," Carl said. When Wenzel came to pick us up, I carried that damn rock all the way home. I stopped once as it was so heavy, and Wenzel said, "If you stop again, it stays there." It was a lot of effort, but I made it. I put it in my bedroom where I was convinced it shone at night. It wasn't long before Wenzel moved it to the garden. I knew there was something special about natural rock. Caroline and I were to stay with Carl and his mum, whilst John and Jody stayed with another aunt called Petal in a caravan. Wenzel often spoke badly of Petal on account of her being very religious. She was always his parents' favourite, and he hated that, and therefore he hated her too. Joanne's was a great big new adventure. I had loads to do in the garden, and Carl was brilliant. He'd served 22 years in the Cheshire Regiment and boxed for his country. I'd stand for hours looking at his caps and medals. Carl had routines, and he always stuck to them, from getting up to going to bed. He'd go for a bath with 3 inches of water in it. It'd take no longer than 15 minutes. I only found out because I walked in on him once. Then he'd have breakfast and head to work. On the way home, he'd grab 4 cans of Skol and have tea whilst doing paperwork. Then it was drinks and the news before a movie in bed. For those who are unaware, or in another country, Skol is just a can of lager. Skol is a brand, just like Budweiser or Carlsberg or Foster's. An odd habit they both had was covering up the electrical items before they went to sleep. I wasn't sure if this was Carl's idea or Joanne's, but I presumed an odd logic that perhaps if burglars can't see it through the window, then they won't break in. It must have been summer, because I was hot and allowed outside a lot more than I would have been at home, wherever that was. I'd made friends with a lad called Michael around my age. I didn't know where he lived, but he knocked on for me sometimes. This day we'd be going into people's back gardens looking for treasure. We didn't want anything. We just wanted to see what was there. Michael said he knew of a great one where we wouldn't be caught. Somehow the danger made it more fun. We'd entered down the side of a house and met a small wall we could both stand on. Below it, however, on the other side, was a very high drop and a lawn. It was too high to play on, but the garden was surrounded by huge hedges. It was an ideal place to play. We kicked the ball around for a while and soon got bored when Michael asked me, "Do you see anyone at the house?" I hadn't. We went to the back door and pulled the handle down. It was open. Someone must be home. We opened it anyway. The kitchen was empty. I can remember a mixture of fear and excitement jumping through me. I went in first. There were ornaments in the living room and a wallet on the fire surround. "Man upstairs," I pointed and whispered. Michael walked back in and took the wallet and took me in the kitchen. "Now what?" I asked. We had no idea what we were looking for. I knew not to take the money, because if we got caught we'd be in serious trouble. I put the wallet back exactly as I'd found it. When I entered the kitchen, Michael had his head in the freezer. He emerged with a box full of Jubilee lollies and laughed silently. He handed me a few and laughed with nerves loudly. We both burst out laughing and ran for the door. It was difficult to stand though, laughing so hard. We sat in next door neighbour's garden and ate a lot. Carl had said Carol and I could go out together as long as we stayed together. We rarely played together, as she'd grown up with an uncle and aunt, and I'd grown up with my grandparents. We didn't really see each other apart from at home with Wenzels, and we weren't allowed to play there at all, so we had no idea what to do together. I decided I'd show her the secret garden, and we'd play frisbee in it. No fear this time, just walked straight into the garden, and Caroline loved it. Enormous hedges, large lawn. I threw the frisbee hard towards Caroline. The wind took it high into the hedge. Caroline gave me a "what we are doing now, genius" look. The little blue disc was too high to reach. Unless... "I know," I said. "You wait here. I'll jump off the wall into the hedge. I'll grab the frisbee and land down there on the grass." Caroline was halfway through saying something like, "Are you sure that's safe?" when I reached the top of the wall. I tested my balance before I made the big jump. I can still feel the brick beneath my thin trainers. Okay. I jump, grab the frisbee, spin into the hedge, and land on my feet. "There," I said, pointing to an empty patch of grass. I shuffled towards the edge and glanced down. My world span, my foot slipped out from beneath me. I don't remember falling. I fell so fast. I do remember the impact. I'd landed on my elbows, and both shoulders jumped out of their sockets. Secondarily, I'd whacked the base of my spine, sending a shockwave up my back. "I can't move," I said. Caroline stood beside me, thinking I was faking it. "Don't touch me!" I screamed, as the pain ripped through where my shoulders used to be. I could feel the skin tightening on my right shoulder. I must have blacked out, because when I woke up I was on Caroline's back. She'd somehow got my arms around her neck and was dragging me along piggyback style. My world was blurry and pain-ridden. To top it off, I was babbling. I blacked out again. I was on Carl's sofa, lay against Joanna, who was running her fingers through my hair and ranting in German. The only parts I caught were "Call home soon," and "Soon call home." It wasn't long until he was stood in front of me. He was so calm and quiet. "Can you lift your arms?" I tried my left, and it moved a few inches. My right just lay there. Carl took both of my wrists and said, "Relax." I leaned back on Joanne and exhaled as he yanked both of my arms straight out in front of me. Both shoulders went pop and my face burnt with tears, but my shoulders felt like they fit my body again. I was up and about in a couple of days, but I wasn't allowed out of the garden, so they could see if I had any problems because of the fall. Caroline told me in the front garden that I'd really scared her. She thought I was dead. I told her the same thing Pat had told me. "Don't be silly. I'm not going anywhere." "You coming out or what?" a voice shouted from across the road. I turned to see Michael waving his arm to me. "No, mate, not today," I shouted back, thinking of my sister beside me. "Whatever, pussy," he yelled. I turned away to talk to Caroline. Something hit the ground near her. "Go play with your sister, then," he shouted. "Go in," I told Caroline, and picked up a piece of slate from the drive. She vanished through the front door. Another thud as a stone hit the front wall close to me. "Carl will be out in a minute. You best leave," I shouted to Michael. "I'm not scared of him," Michael yelled back. "He's my uncle, and he was in the army," I yelled back, getting angry, suddenly prepared to fight in my uncle's defence. "Pussy," Michael yelled, chucked another stone. It just left his hand when I let fly with the slate. It curled up into the air, and he started running. I remember trying to guide it with my mind. I visualised it hitting him. I just wanted to scare him, but it arched and curled downwards towards him. He looked back. As he did, it hit him, right above the eye. He hit the floor and got up running, holding his head, now covered in blood. I turned round to see Caroline watching from the hallway. Then she disappeared. Michael had vanished by the time I looked back. "My uncle's in the army?" I heard said calmly from beside me. Everything was calm with Carl. I both respected him greatly and feared him greatly, although I'd never had any reason to fear him. "Sorry," I said. "Go on in," he replied, and I did. That night Carl had to go out and said Caroline and I could watch a film together. He wasn't used to kids and didn't know what we could watch. He told us to use his room, so we sat on his double bed and he put a video on. "This is the most child-friendly one I've got, sorry," he said, and he meant it. He genuinely had no idea what was good for us to watch. So we sat and watched Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1. Joanne was making her usual bacon sandwiches for us in the frying pan. Small kitchen. Caroline and I were sat opposite ends of the table. She kept turning around to tell us how happy she was to have children around again, or something in German to the same effect. We were never quite sure, but we both nodded and smiled a lot. There was bacon cooking, and it smelled great. I could never get bored of this. As she turned back, something fast happened and the frying pan was on fire. Joanna started flapping, "Nine, nine, nine," waving a dishcloth around until that caught fire too. She threw the lot into the sink as the curtains went up in flames. Chapter 15. I was on autopilot. I have no idea how I knew what to do. I stood up from the table and pushed Caroline out the back door, then went back and grabbed Joanne. The curtains were falling down by this point. She was waving her arms around wildly. I chucked the pan of fire into the garden and returned to the kitchen. Jumped onto the sideboard and pulled the curtains down by the pole, just ripping them loose and chucking them outside. Then I turned the cooker off. Carl came home and had an argument with Joanne. It was all in German. Then he thanked me in English for helping her. He said I was brave. I didn't feel it. I felt scared. Joanne had nearly burned, and I thought I'd be in trouble for helping. So as soon as I turned the cooker off, I was silent all day. Maybe the fire was why we couldn't stay there anymore. Wenzel and Bernie picked us up, and it was back to life in the car. Only a few days this time, though, as Wenzel had found us a hotel to stay at. Something called emergency accommodation at the Erosa Hotel in Wimslow. We'd have our own room, and so did Wenzel and Bernie. I was sad to leave Nan's, but I knew I'd be okay once we reached the hotel. It was night time when we arrived. There was a huge car park which was unlit. A van with men inside, and a few men sat around it. A black man, alone with a hat on, of a type I'd never seen before. It was also the first time I'd seen a black